imagine this. You've been given an assignment to write about some aspect of smartphone usage today. You decide to write about how smartphones can help and or hurt relationships. You've done some research and writing, and now you're working on your introduction. You're stuck. Nothing. Nada. Zip. What do you do? Well, we have some suggestions for you. There are three things that generally need to go into an introduction. Well, actually two. One of these is optional, but it can help get you started. One is to capture the attention of the reader so they want to read the essay. Second, you need to provide context, background, and/or urgency so the reader understands the essay topic and or shows why it's important to discuss the issue or topic right now. And finally, a third step is to end with a thesis. This is a sentence that creates a roadmap for your essay. So with step one, you can capture your reader's attention with hooks or attention getters. And you've probably heard of these before, but we want to give you some examples. So you could start with the anecdote, example from real life, a startling fact or statistic, a quote, or a rhetorical question. Now, this is optional. It may be that you just really go to step two and develop it more. In a more formal paper, that might be the way you capture the reader's attention, is providing more context or a case study. So this really will depend upon your assignment. If you're not sure, look at the samples the instructor's given you, read your instructions, and of course, always ask your instructor questions. Let's look at examples of each of these to give you some ideas. An anecdote is defined as a short, amusing, or interesting story about a real incident or person. It could be your experience, observation, or someone else's experience or observation. Here's an example. "You're it," my friend Jay shouts. "I've done it. I've just picked up my phone. You better leave a good tip today. We're really putting this server to work." When I go out to eat with my friends, we have an agreement and all put our phones upside down in front of us. The first person to check their phone has to pay for the tip. Today, I'm that first person. So here you can see how this starts with a story, and it kind of gets us into it. Instead of just being kind of, let me go into facts and stuff, we've got a little story to liven it up, an experience we can imagine and we can see. If you're going to use this, you have to keep the formality of your assignment in mind. Does this fit, right? Is this something you can do in this kind of writing? Should you use personal pronouns or not? Does that fit in with your assignment, with the instructions? If your example comes from someone or somewhere else, make sure and give credit for that. Let's look at another thing you can do. The startling fact or statistic. Sometimes this is a great way to get people in your essay. Check this one out. A 2018 Pew Research Center study found that 77% of grandparents owned a smartphone. Compare that to 73% of all adults, and you can see that our grandparents are outpacing even the general population of adults when it comes to owning technology and smartphones. So here this statistic shows us that, grandparents, a lot of times we think of grandparents as not being with technology, but they actually have, as a cohort, more phones than just the general population of all adults. So it gets us thinking about the topic overall. You see, both of these are not about the specific subject, but just about the topic. Now, again, do you need to use formal citation or not? How formal is your paper? You want to pay attention to that. This is just giving that attribution according to, a 2018 Pew Research Center study found. So this is just the less formal version of giving that credit. Even if you don't have to use that formal citation, make sure you do that attribution. The next one is to use a quote. And this is a very popular technique. However, be careful with this one. Remember, your ideas and arguments should generally be the focus of your paper. Don't let someone else's words take away from that. So here's an example, and this one starts out in a rather more formal way. David A. Sabra, Julia L. Burskin, and Richard B. Slatcher in Smartphones and Close Relationships, The Case for an Evolutionary Mismatch, say, we emphasize that smartphones themselves are not good or bad. but how they are used and when they are used can make smartphones instruments for success or agents for failure. And so here we've got this quote that gives us these authorities, and we have the title, who they are, the title, and you can see at the end of that quote, we have the location, where would we find this? So this is using formal citation. If you're asked to do that, then you've been studying it. If not, don't worry, we'll get you there eventually. So this is an example of that more formal citation, and we can see introducing that quote again introduces this idea of the topic itself. So what we're really doing with each of these is just getting people's minds on the topic. Remember, they could be doing anything. They could be grading other papers. They could have just been taking out the trash. Whatever it is, we want to get people's space into our essay. And then there's one more that we'll suggest, but we'll suggest with a qualification. The rhetorical question is a question that's not asked in order to receive an answer from the audience or reader. It's just posed to make a point. However, be very careful with this one. Many readers, i.e. teachers, would rather you start with your views and ideas. And some instructors, in fact, will tell you do not use rhetorical questions. They can be overused. And the main point of your essay is to provide an answer. What is your thought on this? So while it's not a bad technique, it's also one that you want to be careful about. And some readers will tell you, don't do it. So definitely check with your instructor. And then if you decide to do it, really think through it. Say, could it be better for me to give the answer? And just phrase it as a statement instead of a question. And look at it both ways. But here's an example of using a rhetorical question. How many times have you walked into a room and seen nothing but the tops of people's heads because everyone is staring down at their phones? Boom, just like that. We do know all of a sudden we're talking about people and their phones, right? So again, it's another example of getting your reader, whatever that reader's been doing, their mind into this space of the topic you're going to talk about. But we can't just say, here's our general topic. We've got to move people toward our main point. And that's what the second step does. Providing context, background knowledge, and or urgency. So you could be doing any of these. And again, like I pointed out at the beginning, that you might not use those common attention getters. You might be moving straight into this. But there are a number of ways you can do this depending on your essay, and you may include more than one of these. You may be discussing the subject that will be analyzed, explaining the problem, the controversy, or the issue with that topic, or showing why it's important to discuss the issue or topic right now. What's the urgency? And those could include a number of things. Some examples are what's the cost to society? How is this a generally shared concern? Are there any social justice claims involved with this? Is there a critical occasion, something that has happened recently in the news? So let's look at some follow-up sentences that would come from the examples we started. With the smartphones and the grandparents, we can move on and say, however, smartphones are relatively new in terms of our living with them. And as we learn how to adjust to them in our lives, we are only now beginning to have a base of research that lets us look at their effect in the long term. Understanding what research tells us about smartphones' effects is important. So this is that subject that will be analyzed. What are we moving into? Here's an example of kind of problem, controversy, or issue. Many grandparents, this is the grandparent one, get smartphones to keep in touch with their grandchildren and build relationships with them. Whether smartphones really help build stronger relationships is something that numerous researchers have looked at in recent years. So you can see it's, if we started with the grandparents and that statistic, we're saying this is their intent, why they are getting the smartphones, and then we're looking at, well, does this actually help relationships or not? That creates that connection. This is moving from that rhetorical question of, you see people just staring at their phones, no matter who. So why is it important to discuss right now? As our phones have become smarter, we've become more attached to them. However, understanding how that affects our attachment to others is another important aspect of this technology. And so you can also see the overlap with some of these other options. It really does, you can see this kind of similarity overall of moving people into this. And one more example, way we could do a generally shared concern is, though it's not true of everyone all the time, we do spend a lot of time looking at our phones these days. Many people are concerned about the amount of time we spend on our phones and wonder how it is affecting our relationships. So again, all of the examples, the attention getters, just really focus more on phones, right? Smartphones. So they were like, okay, whatever your reader was doing, now they are thinking about smartphones. And then you can see this middle step. What it does is it moves people from, okay, smartphones to, oh, not just smartphones, but smartphones and relationships. And so that moves us on to step 3, which is that thesis sentence. And your thesis sentence is vitally important. Now, often you may start kind of knowing what you want to say, but really it's not until you've done your research, your thinking, whatever you're required to do, whether this is just an opinion piece coming from you and your experience, whether you've been asked to do some research, a little bit of both, usually is what happens. Um, Whatever it is, you have something to say, and you've got to say something about it, not just kind of, oh, it's out there. You're rarely asked to do just a summary of stuff. If your teacher wants only summarize and tell me what others think, then they'll tell you very clearly. But if they say, what do you think? If they say explain, if they say discuss, if they say analyze, if they're giving you a question to answer, they're saying, okay, yeah, go out, think about this, maybe do some research, maybe do some reading. What do you think in the end? And your thesis is that. It's the answer to that. What do you think about this in the end? So it's usually the last sentence of the introduction. Put it there. Give readers what they expect. It tells the readers what you'll discuss in your essay, and most importantly, shows your judgment or point of view on the topic. It should be a clear statement. No questions here. Your thesis is the answer to that main question your essay set out to answer. Think of it as an umbrella. It must cover your subtopic in your essay so it doesn't have to state each of those things specifically. So your thesis in the end is your big so what. Why does this matter? What do you think? Overall, what's the big deal? And here, I'm going to show you the paragraph that starts with the anecdote, the narrative, the story. But the thesis at the end of this works at the end of every single example paragraph we have looked at. So no matter what you do, you can see here that any of these approaches can lead to the same thesis. So here's the example in its entirety. You're it, my friend Jay shouts. I've done it. I've just picked up my phone. You better leave a good tip today. We're really putting this server to work. When I go out to eat with my friends, we have an agreement and all put our phones upside down in front of us. The first person to check their phone has to pay for the tip. Today, I'm that first person. As our phones have become smarter, we've become more attached to them, and sometimes their pull can seem irresistible even when we're with others. However, understanding how that affects our attachment to others is an important aspect of this technology. While they do have some benefits for relationships, overall, smartphones can create feelings of disconnection and divided attention that can lead to conflict. And so that last sentence is what I would say is my thesis. Of course, you could think about this, you could read the same research and come to a different conclusion. But we want that to be very clear. You can see it very clearly states, it's not, there's benefits, but there's also these feelings of disconnection, divided attention. Now, there's my promise to my readers. Dear reader, you know what I'm going to talk about for the rest of my essay? Benefits, disconnection, divided attention. So you can see how it just kind of lays out that idea. Now, often you may not write this first, or this may be the last step, because you may have done some writing on the body, kind of writing down basics of overall what's your main point, what does research say, what is your observation, your experience say, and you've written some of that. Maybe you've written about what do you think in the big picture, in the end, which is your conclusion. What do you conclude after doing your thinking, right? And so it may be that your introduction is something you write last, Or even if it's not, even if you start with your introduction, once you're done with your paper, read your paper through from the body to conclusion, and then ask yourself, what was my main point? What did I say? Write that sentence down and compare it to your last sentence in your introduction and say, what version of this really says what I said in this paper? And so that's one of the ways to really kind of make sure your thesis matches, because in the end, if your paper says something different from your thesis, it's a lot easier to change your thesis and make it match your paper, which is what you really wanted to say, than it is to change the whole paper. Now again, go back to your assignment, make sure you followed your assignment, and then make sure your thesis is a clear statement, not a question. So there are 2 steps for sure, and one for maybe, that will help you write that introduction, capturing that attention, providing context, background, or urgency, and ending that introduction with your thesis.